This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Attention Proto Throttle users. If you've ever wanted to have your throttle fit more comfortably in your hand and change the batteries without removing the throttle's case, now you can. Introducing the Narrow Throttle, a new product developed by Scott Thornton that reduces the size of the Proto Throttle by over 25%. Log on to narrowthrottle.square.site to learn more. That's narrowthrottle.square.site. Enjoy more comfort and never have to open the case again. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On this episode, we're calling it From Paper to Plywood. We're going to learn the process from a dream to reality and all the steps that come in between. And joining me to have that conversation, and joining us for that conversation is Dave Oppedisano. Dave, good to see you.
Hey, Ray, thanks for having me back. Good seeing you.
Great seeing you. And we just saw each other at the New England RPM. Amongst a whole bunch of places that we're seeing each other lately. It's been great hanging out with you, not only up in New England, but down in Texas and pretty much anywhere and everywhere we go. And we've got some destinations coming up. St. Louis RPM's just around the corner, but great that we're able to sit down and talk about that Lakeside Sub build that you're doing that I got a chance to take a peek at when I was there just outside of Fort Worth and see what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's been a busy year and a half since the original Lakeside Sub came down. So in that time frame, we I managed to tear the layout out. We moved from Pennsylvania to Texas, built a new house, built a new train building since there's no basements in Texas, and came up with a track plan. So it's been a busy year and a half. It really has.
Yeah, it's been a busy year and a half for you, and I can't wait to dive into that. The last time that we had you on the podcast, holy moly, episode 11. We met at the New England RPM in 2022. I had just started the podcast. You had done a presentation on your first Lakeside Sub build. I remember the thing that really impressed me about your Lakeside Sub was your professional panels that you put on that layout. And I was really drawn to that. And I said, I got to talk to Dave about that. Dave's holding that up in the picture. We'll share some pictures of that in our show notes like we did back on August 16th, 2022. Dave, a lot has changed since then. Why don't you talk us through the first Lakeside Sub build? Tell us a little bit about your decision to even model the Lakeside Sub. What drew you to the BNSF?
Well, the original decision was started off a video. I was in the California State Railroad Museum, and a 7-idea production video called East of Spokane was playing. I thought the video was very interesting, so I bought the DVD, brought it home, and I said, hey, that's pretty neat. And I'd been to Spokane several times, did some rail fanning just in Spokane itself, and it was time for a change. I originally was going to model something in the Texas area between Fort Worth and Amarillo. It was just a very long stretch of railroad with industries were basically dropping off as you went further west towards Amarillo. So the Lakeside Sub seemed like a shorter and easier thing to model. Maybe not easier, but it was a more compact area to model. Just kind of fell in love with. Plus, it had they were interchanged with the Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific, and so there was a lot to model, and everything you could possibly model, just like the Transcon come across Amarillo. So it was just the extension of the Northern Transcon.
Awesome stuff. And I know for work, you get to travel a lot. You get to see all these areas. So I imagine it's very tempting to model a whole bunch of areas as you're kind of coast to coast and everywhere in between. But the lakeside seems to stick, huh?
It does. I mean, I've traveled all over the country, and I've always loved the BNSF. Originally Santa Fe, but the modern BNSF is still stuck. It's a very interesting overall subdivision model.
While you were in Pennsylvania, how far did you get on that previous build?
Previous build, it was the overall layout was 30 by 40. It was an L-shaped layout. About 80% of the benchwork was in. Half of the staging was installed. The staging was originally planned to be a double level staging, basically stacking on top of each other. Half of it was in. The layout was completely signaled. So we had actually made a lot of progress on it. I actually had a layout expansion in the works as we were about to tear it down. So about another, I think we were going to put an extra 60 linear feet of benchwork in. The base or the foundation was in place. And then I just stopped construction when we decided to put the house up for sale.
So a move is determined. You're going to head out of Pennsylvania, head down to Texas. And then you have all this. I mean, like you had quite a bit done. You're looking to expand it. Were you able to preserve any parts of the first Lakeside Sub in this move?
The only physical parts of the layout I saved were staging areas. There was a 24-foot section of staging, 3 8-foot sections that I saved. I still have it. They're in the back of the shop here. Whether I use it or not, I'm not sure, but I kept them just so I could have something I could put on the opposite end of the layout, as I built forward.
Was there a reason for not saving more of that layout?
It was too much. It was too much of a hassle. When you start tearing things down, you just get into the destruction mode. When I put stuff together, I nail it and screw it, but there's a lot of nails that are sticking out. It's just not worth it. The time and effort for me just wasn't there. So about 3,000 pounds of bench work went into the dumpster, rented a U-Haul trailer and carted it away. It was, at one point it was sad because I had these real big blind curves. They were 30 plus feet in length. They were beautiful, but they came apart in about 5 minutes with a Sawzall.
Yeah, you think about all the intricate detail, of cutting and making sure everything's smooth and how quickly it can just come apart with, like you said, a reciprocating saw and just hack the thing right up and it goes away quick, doesn't it?
In 5 minutes, it was chopped up like bologna. It was gone. So, but it's okay. After the first cut, all the rest of the cuts are pretty quick and easy.
What were some of the lessons you learned from the first Lakeside Sub build when you were looking back at this and, the in-between time, which we'll dive into in a moment, but what were some of the things now looking back at that build that you say, I know I could have done better here or there? What were some of those improvements that you knew you wanted to make on your next build?
What I liked initially was using the I-beams, laminated I-beams for construction. Number one, they were straight, flat, really nice platform to work with. I liked that a lot. I liked the curved backdrops using bendable plywood. That was a real nice product. Things I didn't really care for. Masonite's kind of a necessary evil sometimes. You have to deal with it. I didn't like on the staging yard. I used that. Back then I built it using Atlas Code 83 track, and I just didn't like the way the Code 83 went down because it's so flexible. I would typically wire my track before I put it down, and when it wouldn't hold the curve, it was very difficult to work with, at least for me.
So with that, what were some of the things that you said, okay, next layout, this is what I'm going to do? I know that you even changed the track that you're using now, right?
Well, I'm back to using all microengineering, Code 83, for Code 83 and Code 70. But I'm even using that in a staging yard now, just due to the experience I had using the Atlas track. I think what mostly versus saying, hey, I like this versus like that, I think you just kind of, when you build a layout, you come up with certain techniques and you're able to go, okay, that technique worked. It worked pretty well. Now, when you replicate that same technique, it cuts the time in half or even to a third or a quarter. So I think that's what the initial experience off the initial layout granted me, was experience to do something in the future.
Yeah, always learning opportunities within layouts and whether you're keeping it or building it. And I think that's kind of a powerful thing in our hobby, and things that we forget is that your first layout or your current layout doesn't always have to be your last layout. And sometimes, like you found out, it may not be, and you didn't quite have that planned when you initially built it. You may have thought that was probably closer to your last one, right?
I thought so. And you never know what's around the corner. So, and we made the decision to move, and it's just another experience. It's, I hear a lot of folks talk, are you going to be able to finish it or not? Whether I finish it or not is irrelevant. It's just part of the journey. That's what I'm really on. and what I'm after, not the final destination.
It is that journey, and you're being able to start over. And it's a great way to look at it because you had to do it anyway. So might as well dive into it and enjoy the process.
Yeah, no, exactly right. What I liked about the previous layout was the long runs. I've always loved watching modern, whether they're intermodal or tank trains or, long earthworms, as BNSF calls them. They're always fun to watch. I like watching long trains roll. Back in the previous layout, when we started playing around with different train lengths, settled on about a 24 car length, which looked pretty good. And I always thought 3 engines on the point looked better than 2. For some reason, just look better. More is better. So with the longer layout here, we're building with the longer runs, we'll be able to run at least 3 units on a point and maybe some DPUs in the rear.
Let's talk about some downtime, because right now I'm personally in a downtime. I kind of feared the downtime when you finally pull the plug on a layout. And of course you had to, because you're selling the house. I mean, the new owners aren't going to let you hang around and continue to mess around with your layout. It's got to come down. It's got to go. So you're forced into that downtime. Talk about how you utilize the time in between leaving Pennsylvania and then heading towards Texas, and don't have a building yet. You don't have the house yet, but you still have in your mind some building going on. Talk about that time in between.
Well, for the new, since we weren't going to have a basement, I wanted to build an outbuilding, or shops, they call them in Texas. So we just settled on a 30 by 40 metal building. The reason for 30 by 40, it's about the same dimensions as the previous basement. The previous basement was more of an L shape. This is a pure rectangle at 30 by 40 dimension. So that was a little bit of a process there. It has a little bit of a workshop office area off to the side where I could do work, airbrushing and so forth. Things I didn't incorporate into it. I didn't incorporate any water or bathrooms. It's just an additional cost that wasn't worth it at this point. But the overall size, 30 by 40, is probably big enough for anybody, especially if you do a double-decker layout, which what this is. The previous layout was a single deck, and to get the longer runs and get the entirety of the run, we double-decked it.
So the 30 by 40 was decided based on your previous space and knowing that, an idea would fit. It's not the same track plan though, right? Is this completely different?
It's completely different. It is. Also, when you start getting into building construction, it's cheaper to go longer. This is wider. So when you start getting wider than 30 feet, this cost starts going up significantly due to the steel prices. It's better to go longer. So like a 30 by 50 or 60.
What kept you from doing that? I mean, imagine the temptation was there, and I've seen the property. You probably could have done 30 by 50, 30 by 60. I mean, other than the wallet, was there any other thing that said, no, I got to keep this to 30 by 40 and kind of put some guardrails on yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to have some sort of limitations, right? So yeah, it would always be, you always want more. Everyone wants bigger and better and more. But, realistically, you've got heat and cool this building. So the costs go up and up, The buildings are optimized in Texas for cooling versus heating, but you still got to, the bills go up just to keep the climate control going. So it's a good trade-off, 30 by 40.
So you knew you were going to have this, but the building perhaps isn't up yet. Did you start to build the track plan before the building went up, or did the building go up and then you say, all right, let's dive into a track plan? Which came first, chicken or egg?
Well, the track plan started, I had Bob's track plans do the layout design for me, Bob Sprague. So I talked to Bob back in September of 24, and we contracted to have the layout designed. He did some initial work. The final version was version J, and we started with version A, but that went over several months. As he was doing his initial design, I had to build and up. I had the overall dimensions. When we did a 30 by 40 building, those are outside dimensions. So I had to take into account the inner dimensions of the steel structure, which put it down to 29.5 by 39.5. And then I told Bob, let's put another 6 inches just for interior walls. So the actual layout is 29 by 39. So once we had the dimensions, and then Bob got to work, and we also have some like doors. Doors always become an issue. We have a big 10-foot garage door in the front of the building for access for any bigger equipment. And then there's another door in the back, which is an outward opening door, so it wouldn't infringe on the layout. So Bob was pretty happy when he saw that door opened outwards and didn't have to deal with the door. So we have no duck unders. We have a little bit of a knot under when you first enter the layout. It's a 70-inch knot under, so it's not that big of a deal.
You talk about versions. We're working with Bob here, and you said version J. If my math is correct, that's 10 revisions to this plan. That's quite a few revisions. Talk through the process from going from A to J. What were some of the back and forth? What did that look like?
Well, initially I told Bob, I said, I'd like to do it on one level if we could. And every time you add a peninsula, the peninsula end adds an incredible amount of space or eats up a large amount of space. So we initially talked about a single level. And then I said, feel free to design a mushroom if we can get to a mushroom design. And as we started getting to that, the mushroom just became a little bit too complicated, construction wise. So we went back to just do a pure double deck layout without the helix, where it's a continuous climb type of layout. And that's what we kind of settled on. And then we started working around the different aspects of what I wanted in the layout. And one aspect of the layout that I thought was very difficult to design was Marshall Canyon on the west side of Spokane. So if any of your listeners from the West Coast have driven into Spokane on Interstate 90 from the west, you come down a hill on the left-hand side of Interstate 90 is a large bridge. That's the Later Canyon Bridge or Later Creek Bridge. And I wanted to have that on the layout. Before I left Pennsylvania, I was actually working on a model of it, and the model was 12 feet long.
Wow.
Just of the actual bridge. But the newer model is going to have the bridge, plus on the bridge is a Y. So we'll have the Y as well. But how do you incorporate or model a scene where the tracks come down both sides of the same valley? So that was always how do we do this? And I had talked to some other designers, and I didn't get a really good answer. But when I spoke to Bob, he had some pretty good insights on how to handle it. So I think we have a pretty good trade-off on how you do it. Because in reality, if you were going to model that, you probably need a long aisle, big 6 or 8 foot aisle just for that one scene to model both sides.
As you're putting this plan together and going through 10 revisions of the Lakeside Sub, I know the one thing that you've also been able to do, you talked about traveling to see prototype, but I know you also travel and see other layouts. Were there other layouts that were having influence on this and the plan, things that you were seeing as you travel and visit other layouts that you wanted to incorporate in bits and pieces?
I think, the biggest influence layout wise was Neil Schofield's layout. It's a Canadian Pacific layout. It's just a beautiful, it's a masterpiece. Just when you go to his layout, you look at the small details. I don't look at the little or big stuff. I look at the big, little stuff, What's the ballast look like coming off a bridge? Because when the girder ends, there's always that bit of ballast that kind of pours down the side. And he models that. Little things like that make a difference. We had an opportunity last October to see John Parker's layout. That was fantastic as well. Just long, open scenes. When you walk down into the layout, there's that one scene with the double crossovers. That to me was incredible. It's just something very, very ordinary, but it's something outstanding.
You talked about the bridge here where you have the Y at the end and trying to incorporate all of that. Do site visits also start to help change the plan as well? Like when you start to see more of the prototype or you find out more about your prototype, did that have any factor into your layout changes as well?
Yeah, I think anytime you see anything in person, it changes your perspective of it. I have traveled to the Lakeside Sub and been up and down the whole division or a subdivision. So I kind of knew what it should look like. Obviously, if you get on Google Earth or any of those places, they're great. You can get the street map view and you can kind of walk around and almost be there. That's pretty incredible too. I actually use that for the small little subdivisions that come off the branch lines, and you're able to get some good modeling ideas off these.
So one thing I'm very curious about is your track plan, even initially, how that was put together to coordinate the operational functionality of your layout, what you had in your mind of the things that you needed, because I know you're operationally minded. I know you also like to rail fan your layout. You talked about these nice sized trains that you like to see going through the scenery. Talk about the things that you knew you needed in your track plan to make that operation plan function correctly.
Well, I knew I needed stage, and I had the stage in yours design. There were 10 tracks each with reverse loops on either side because I wanted the tracks to be able to, or the trains to just automatically restage themselves. So 10 track staging would automatically restage or a reverse loop, which would give me an option of also running trains for testing them, because you always need to test your trains across the layout to see how they're running. So that was the main thing. Actually, when I added the reverse loops, if the layout was stub ended, it would have had a little bit of a different shape to it. I don't think it would have had the the 3 levels where the staging levels are, just due to the turnaround loops. So a stub end staging would have definitely saved room. But again, now I'm having a high five each set of engines off the layout, or build some sort of transfer table, which just adds a little bit extra complexity, which I didn't really want to do. Back in the day, if you remember those Alan Keller videos, Great Model Railroads, David Barrow talked about, hey, if he were to build a layout, he would start with staging. And that's something I did not do on a previous layout. I started building the layout first, and staging came second, which was a mistake, because if you build staging first, anything you build from that point forward can be operated. You know what I mean? Because you have staging to feed that back and forth. So, and then at subsequent, so forth and so on, it's all being fed. So that's why staging had to go first, at least conceptually. And actually, practically, it had to go in first just for dimensions and space. But it all started with the staging back on either end of the layout. So it's got the staging yards are basically duplicates of each other, or mirrors of each other on upper and lower decks. So they can hold. I think the capacity is, the shortest staging track is 30 feet. The longest is about 35 feet. So my math was based on a Trinity covered hopper, which is somewhere it takes 6 feet to get 8 of them. So it's about 18 feet for 24 cars, plus power, which is 2 Gevo type engines, about 22 inches each. So, but I was figuring on 22 feet, but we're well beyond that right now.
So we're talking length in a staging yard, but how about width? I would imagine that the number of staging tracks in that yard was determined by the number of trains you plan on running on that layout, maybe some additional storage as well. Talk about determining what you are going to emulate for traffic on your layout and how that affected your track plan.
Well, I'm planning on staging about 20 trains plus anything that's staged on the layout. I don't have the operational portion of it worked out yet, but I mean, in a prototype, you always want more, right? But yeah, what's the formula for staging? Staging plus 1, or 2x time plus 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's got to be a limit too of how big you're going to make it. My staging yard is 10 tracks wide on 2.5-inch center. It's about 30 inches, somewhere close to that, which is pretty far if you need to reach in. So again, that's another limiting factor of how far can you reach in to grab a train if it comes off the tracks back there. Different things to think about. It'd be nice to have 48 inches across. There's no way to get back to those tracks back there unless you're on both sides of it.
It'd be a wild dream to be able to have that much train to be able to fill all that kind of staging yard too. But like you said, you also got to factor in the human element, like you said, being able to, be able to fit in there and the ergonomics of that. And speaking of ergonomics, I know my good friend Don Iris is listening to this, wondering about aisle space. And that's something that I think is important. What was your considerations when you started thinking about aisle space on this layout?
That was part of Bob's criteria. I don't think we have anything less than, it's primarily 3 feet, all of the aisles. Some are more. I think there might be, no, I think all the pinch points are, I think about 36 inches as well. So they're all fairly wide. It would be nice to have 4-foot aisles, 5-foot aisles, but at the same time, you're just wasting real estate at that point. So I think there's a happy medium somewhere in the middle. I tend to do a lot of solo ops, and even if I'm an operator with a crew, I don't want to have a mass crew, maybe 4 to 6 guys. I want guys to get the feeling that they're in the middle of nowhere, out in Eastern Washington State, just running a train. I just want them to get that feeling of being out there, just watching stuff go by. Solitude.
So you start to finally, after version 10, reel in on this plan. Talk about getting to the point you have the building's in place, and now you're ready. Because to me, I'm trying to envision taking this drawn out 3-page plan that you got from Bob and turning it into an action plan. Talk about your process of looking at this track plan and saying, okay, here's the very first step I need to take. How do you even get prepared for that?
Well, you need to prepare to building, just like anything else, whether you're preparing a basement or building. The building was up, the shell of it was up by the end of February of 25, but it still wasn't insulated and it wasn't air conditioned. So, or did it have power? So the building was preset to have power set up in it. So we put power out there. We then had it insulated, and then we had air conditioning and heating installed. So that all took till August of 25. So a few months after we actually moved into the house, the shop was ready to go, or the train building. Once the building was ready to go, I went down and decided, we're going to hang a layout from the walls. How do we do that? We need, some studs or something along those lines. So I needed to stud out the perimeter of the building. And what's the biggest problem when you start, putting studs in any of the wood you get? It starts warping, right? I mean, let's go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you'll see how twisted wood really is. They use a product down here in Texas on home buildings. It's called finger joint 2x4s or studs. So the finger joint material seems not to warp or bend as much. So I finally got around to ordering lumber. I basically had a small truck deliver a whole pallet of wood, and it was all finger joint 2x4. That was in November of 25. And then shortly thereafter, I started framing up the building. Now I'm working solo here, so that's a little bit of, if I had help, it would go quicker. Not that it's a complaint or anything. It's just fact of life. So I had to come up with a few techniques on how to put wall sections together. And something else I had not thought of, how do you attach wall sections to a metal building? Never had to experience that before. So I wound up using little L brackets, some steel L brackets, and you can get them at Lowe's or Home Depot, and then use self-tapping screws to screw into the metal of the building, and then use wood screws to tap into the frame, and then you secure it to the building in that respect. So a lot of different things. How do I do this or how do I do that? So I had to come up with solutions to all that. And that's just basic, construction. Put the perimeter up so I have something now to hang the layout from. In the previous layout, I had, sheetrocked it and finished the walls completely before I even thought about putting a layout in. But this time, I just wanted to have the raw wood available just to attach benchwork to. All the benchworks can be cantilever off, which isn't a big deal on the lower level. You can always add some diagonal bracing, but on the upper level, different story. How do you keep it from sagging? I know a lot of guys use L brackets. There's some very inexpensive solutions. There are some very expensive solutions that are a little bit more elegant. So I kind of want to be in the middle of those two, because you can get really out of control in terms of pricing on materials nowadays. Like I said, ordered the lumber, started studding out the walls, and just basically building a perimeter framework around the entire building. That started back in November. And little by little, 8 feet at a time, just would stand up. I'd build it on the floor, stand a piece up or stand a section up, drag it across the floor and put it in place. You always need a third set of hands. So a set of clamps always works really well.
Yeah, the set of clamps becomes your best building buddy, doesn't it? When you start to work alone and clamp things up. But we got to follow that progress personally. You were sending many texts as you would make progress and show a wall, a little bit more. Of course, I was joking with you. Okay, it looks like we're heading towards an op session in October. I think we're a little bit farther away than October, but I still like to tease and talk about that. But you're making good progress on that.
But think about why you have to do that. It's just drudgery. It's just work, So you send pictures out to your buddies to keep the synergy going, to keep the energy up. If you don't, it just becomes a lot of work. So send pictures out to your buddies, get some, encouragement. Hey, that's looking good. That doesn't look good. That's actually a pretty good part of the process,
I think another missed part of the process, and it's good that you bring this up, is documentation too. By taking those photos, by sending them, you also have them. It forces you. I get in projects, I'll go from beginning to end, and then I'll go, I should have taken pictures as I went. This would have been good to have documented how I did this. And then you just get so excited to doing it. But for you and sharing that and being excited to share each step, it definitely forces you into that process, doesn't it?
It does. And it keeps you going on a timeline. My initial thoughts were to have all the benchwork up within 1 year of starting. Obviously, I'm not talking a framework. The framework started in November, and it was up sometime by, I think, the end of February timeframe. And then I knew NERPM was on the schedule, and I said, okay, we have about 2 months to get staging working, or at least starting construction on staging. So kind of gives you a little of a time frame. And staging for me it's kind of a critical part of the layout, because the layout's double deck, but where the staging is, it's triple deck. There's 2 staging levels, and Oreo in the center of them is actually one of the operating towns. So that part needed to be right on in terms of space. So, I have a diagram or a track plan, but is it right? Is it going to fit? In all sections. Really, I was thinking about this, because you have turnouts and so forth, and you have these ladders that are designed. Are they going to fit? Now, what I found out when I actually started laying it down is that the ladders were a little longer than they actually were planned out on paper, which was fine, because we had the option of making them a little longer. But it could have been an issue.
Yeah, and that's what I wonder. In all of this, taking that plan from paper to plywood, where you start to find those types of things, and how do you handle it? So, leaving apparently some margin, right? Is that how you start to at least help yourself in handling such problems?
In some places there's margins or you have room for error, but in other places there really isn't. So the thoughts were, how do you take the plan from paper to actual plywood? Well, some people would say, well, you can print it out. That's a lot of printing.
Yeah.
Think about it. I mean, that area there is probably, it's called 30 by 20, so 600 square feet. I'm not going to print 600 square feet. And by the way, even if you print, unless you have a large format printer, or you can be able to tape it together and get it all square. When you're putting something together, you can see that the staging yard is basically big, almost J-shaped. So there's compound curves. We have curves going on tangents and reversing curves. How do I do that? The only way I thought I could do that was just lay it out on a flat piece of plywood table. I thought that would work out the best. So once I came up with the initial thought. I had to measure it out, make sure the tabletops were the right size and they were in the right part of the building. Had to make sure the building was square. That was a little bit of a problem, not the actual squareness of the building, but leveling all that benchwork out. How do I go about leveling it? I mean, I was looking at using lasers, shooting laser beams, basically becoming a mini surveyor. But what I finally worked out doing was just using a number of 4 foot to 6 foot levels, just making sure everything was level. But if you look at the diagram, you can see the initial part of staging where we go into the ladder. That ladder was longer than I anticipated when I laid it out. Now I am using microengineering code 83 number 6s for the ladder. Why I use the microengineering? Because they're built up. I didn't want to go through and have to build fast tracks. Again, that's just added time, which I really didn't want to spend. So it was more efficient just to buy the turnouts. And the ladder wanted that to be a little bit longer than anticipated on the track plan, which was fine. It worked out. The challenge was drawing the arcs onto the plywood. So I initially built the tabletops out of 3/4 inch furniture grade plywood. And then I built radius sticks, or a radius stick with different tangent points off the layout. Now, when I built the radius stick, just basically a stick with a pencil in the end of it. When I made it, I put the pencil in the end, and I left another 2 inches or 2.5 inches to the end. That also added when I would swing the arcs, it would also look for any type of obstruction that I was hitting, if I was going to hit anything at all. So lay out the tangents and then drill holes using a drill press every 2.5 inches to get it all worked out. And this way I would just move from pivot point to pivot point to pivot point. And I wound up, what I use is a little pop rivet, the actual rivet itself, the little aluminum nail that goes through, because it has a little ball on the end. It's easy to pick up and down, put that through the wood and just draw the arcs across the layout. So I had a number of, I think I sent you the pictures of all those little T's that were hanging off the layout. Those are all the tangent points for the arcs. So I would basically drew all the arcs and then the reverse arcs and drew the tangent lines, and it all worked out pretty well. Once I had the lines down, I would put the turnouts down for the ladders, and at that point is where I noticed that the ladders were taking a little bit longer, or were lining up a little bit longer than the plan. But it worked out okay because there was a little bit of room for error in there. Not much, but there was a little bit of wiggle room. So once that was all settled in, I had the portion of the layout where the turnouts and ladders all verified it was going to be accurate. Then at that point, I had to start putting in the reverse loop peninsula to make sure that was in the right spot. So that was a little bit of a challenge also. The track radius on the outside of the reverse loop was 39 inches, but gave 3 inches to that. So it's basically a 42-inch radius arc around the backside of that peninsula. And then where am I lining it up within the room? So I was constantly shooting lasers across the room because I knew where certain reference points were in the building itself, and it had to be exactly spot dead on. And during my presentation in New England, I showed a picture of the tools I was using, and one of them was called the fine adjustment tool, and that was my Stanley 22-inch, framing hammer. But when I built the ends of the peninsula, I used those plywood I-beams, which I actually salvaged from the previous layout. I brought those with me. And if you're just trying to mix, if you got a big piece of wood or a big piece of benchwork and you're trying to move it 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, a little tap with a hammer works very well. It's very efficient, in making things, fine adjustment. If you try to move them by hand, it'll move too much, but little taps will work. So that was the biggest thing there. But once that was validated and the track went in, I also had to think about what's the next step here, because it's not going to be all open bench work. It's going to be bench work that's hanging off a wall. So I actually cut holes in the tabletops and then built walls through the tabletops to support the next 2 levels in that center peninsula section. So that was fun too.
How much time are you spending taking a step back and just staring at all this and just trying to envision all of it? I can almost envision going into a mode, right? Like you're just in this mode, you're completely locked in and seeing all of it in a different way once you get into it and kind of move on that. Is that where you're finding yourself, like kind of just like completely zoomed in on this and, kind of on a roll with it?
At certain points, yeah, you start to see what the final product is going to look like in your mind's eye, and you work towards that goal. Yes, initially, sometimes you got to work through some issues. I think a lot of us, including me, you could sit there for weeks. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Just start doing it, and the solution will present itself. Like, for instance, on the end of the peninsula, how am I going to support the next level of that second and third level there in that area? I beefed it up enough where I could just build up onto it. Think about how home construction, if you've got a second floor, unless it's a load-bearing wall, the inner support walls are, just sat on a plywood floor, right? If they're just dividing up a room. But again, we're building model trains. We're not talking about tonnage here. Although it is overbuilt. I mean, it has just the end peninsula has 8 adjustment legs on it, and each adjustment will hold 400 pounds. So yeah, it's good to 3,200 pounds, but it is overbuilt, but not really required.
Yeah, you build like I do. I build to put engine blocks on things instead of, model railroad stuff. But one thing I can say about my building, and I'm sure you can say about yours, is it ain't going anywhere either.
Well, that's important because, here in Texas, it gets warm. We're already in the 90s, and it's about June now, and we'll go up into the hundreds. So it has to be made for heat, but also has to be made for the cold. So that was something that was definitely in the mind when I was putting stuff together. It needs to be stable. And the only way to really do that is to make it strong.
Tell us how you balance out time with the desire for forward progress without being over aggressive, yet staying away from analysis paralysis and getting too fine with your building to a point where you're not moving forward. How do you make that balance? How do you make the decisions to say that is close enough and I can move forward with that, but then also not moving too fast forward where it's not accurate enough, and then you end up doing rework? How do you make that all work for yourself?
Well, I think for me, initial planning, I travel like you do for work. So when I'm traveling, I have the time on my hands to think about what am I going to do, and layout construction, at least for me, is more a logistics problem. How am I going to do it? What materials am I going to use? When am I going to get the materials? How am I going to get the materials? So, and then once I make those decisions, go out and get them and have them in place and actually come up with a plan. Any progress is forward progress. I always say, just got to move forward. Even if it's a half a step, do something. For me, sometimes if I have to get up or wake up, hey, it's 5 a.m, I'll go out to the shop and again, look around. You always talk about what do you think it's going to be, or what's your design eye? Just keep on making progress. Any progress is forward progress. I think also a lot of guys, including me, you want to make it perfect the first time around, right? It's not going to be perfect. So it's okay. We're not welding steel here. We're just using screws and lumber. So it's okay to cut something out if you don't like it. It's not a big deal. All right. Some of the construction methods I tend to use a lot of initial construction with a nailer. Just nail things together with a gun. I'm not talking big, 10 penny nails, but little brad nails, 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch nails. And that actually will allow you to work very quickly and get things together. And then not only that, but once you have it together, you could put screws in and really tighten it up and make it strong. Because sometimes if you put screws in, the material will move a little bit, right? Unless you're clamping it tight. So by nailing it, you can clamp it, nail it, and then screw it, and it's together, right? If you're using glue, try not to use glue too much, because once you put glue down, it's not coming apart.
It makes it a lot harder, or it's going to rip apart. It isn't going to come apart. Yeah.
It's going to rip apart, and then you might need to get that Sawzall out again and do some fine adjustment on it. But even so, that's not a problem at all. It's not a big deal. Just be flexible. Don't be afraid to make a mistake, because you're going to make a mistake. And if it isn't right, tear it out, fix it. Because if you've gone this far, right, what's the big deal about tearing out a few pieces and making it work? The things are, be careful with the critical points in terms of clearance areas and so forth. Those are the points you really need to keep a close eye on things. Where are the clearance issues? Where are the pitfalls? Try to think ahead along those lines. And that's a great, you talked about earlier about, hey, what did you learn from the previous layout? Well, I need certain distances or spaces to get into wire and so forth and so on. So that was probably one of my biggest things. Just take away.
I guess for me, the hardest thing I would have to do is resist the temptation to rush or try to do too much at the same time to move the progress forward. I'd be so fired up about running trains and trying to get to that point that I might find myself rushing. Do you find yourself tempted to do that, or have you been able to stay fairly disciplined and avoid that?
I think running trains is actually a great motivational part of the layout build. So I'm not ready to run them yet, but I know once I get there, it'll just speed things up. So I don't think that's a detriment by any means for making progress. Yeah, you want to move, keep on going forward, and if you can get a train going. I know in the last layout, when I finally got one of the yards operational, I did some just switching, playing around. I go, that was really cool, to see it actually come to life, because it becomes a little just work, just kind of getting through it until you get to that final line where you actually get to see some things running.
You mentioned the levels, the lasers, the fine adjustment tool that you're so fond of, and Brad shooters and all of that. Have you found a favorite tool through all of this, like one that you just enjoy using, or it's saying that this has been really a huge time saver and has made this job a lot easier?
Well, it's been a few different tools. For building the peninsula, I picked up a new jigsaw, a new DeWalt jigsaw. That really cuts well. It's a very neat, fine cut. I like that, because my previous jigsaw was from 1994. And my wife got it for me for a Christmas present in the hope of building a layout, and it was an old Black & Decker. It just didn't work very well. But I think the jigsaw is a nice tool to have. Wiring, I like electronics. Klein tool wire strippers, I really like those. They're fantastic, beautiful products. So those are two of my favorite tools for wiring. Meters, I have a little inexpensive, it's a $10 or $15 volt amp meter. And that is just great. As the ohm meter portion of it is what I use primarily. And it's a great tool for laying track and checking for shorts and so forth. It's just, if somebody doesn't have one, I would recommend, out of anything, go and get one of those. You probably have all the other tools already. But a little volt ohm meter is a great little tool to have. And of course, the framer's hammer works out real well if I'm making fine adjustments,
Of course. Time for a little advice for the folks that are listening to this podcast, that are planning their build or have their track plan, and they're getting ready to put their layout in the selected area that they have. Talk about the decisions, even before all of that. What should modelers decide before they ever draw their track plan? What would you recommend on that?
What's the goal? What are you trying to do? For instance, this is years ago. I was interested in doing some signaling, so I built a single passing side and just a half of it, just the one side of a passing side, and I was playing around with signals. That was a little, maybe 1 by 12 type of little module, and I managed to work on some track, wiring, signals, little scenery. So it was a great little learning tool. But anything you do is going to be used forward in any subsequent builds you do. You're always learning. You're not going to realize how much you can learn or what path it's going to take you down. That little 1 by 12 module was incredible lesson learns from it, electronic wise for me. It was fun too. That's one thing, you got to have fun, right?
And in that process from paper to plywood, when things don't quite line up the way you thought they were going to, how do you handle that?
Well, in this case, if my ladder's extended anymore, I would just lose one of the tracks. That's what I would do. Or maybe wait and down the road and add that additional track, either on the inside, probably on the inside of the reverse loops there. There's a way around it. It's just a matter of how creative you want to be. Do you want to start adding curved turnouts, and which I really don't want to do if I don't have to. There's always a way, but how is that going to affect the next level above it and so forth, with the fascia coming down and the angles of the layout? Again, big worst case would have just lost one of the tracks. When I went from 10 to 9 staging tracks, in reality, it's not that big of a deal.
So what it sounds like to me is a bit of ebb and flow and a little bit of flexibility in your mindset as you're starting to take this paper plan, put it to a layout, and be able to start building and continue to make progress without a whole lot of analysis paralysis.
Right. I think, at least for me, I have this one peninsula finished with the most of it constructed with the staging area. I could see the next peninsula is another larger peninsula that wraps around it. And I could kind of, in my mind's eye, see that right now. Always thinking about different things, always thinking about lighting. How am I getting power, or, how am I routing cable and or signals and so forth to the inside of the layout? Other things you work through. Where are those wires going to run? They run it over the top of the layout. We talked about maybe building a little storage balcony above one section of the layout because we have a high ceiling in here. So just different things you'll kind of run into. But again, they'll fix themselves as you get there. There's nothing that'll hit a wall and stop you from doing anything for the most part.
Well, that's some sound advice from a guy who is going through that process and taking that paper plan and putting it to plywood. It's always fun to watch the progress that you're making in your shop just outside of Fort Worth, Texas there. And I can't wait to see the Lakeside Sub up and running. I think sooner rather than later. I think you're going to at least have some trains here running probably before we know it.
I think so. The next steps here are I'm going to continue building the next peninsula divider walls. And initially, in the previous basement, I had finished everything and everything was all sheetrock. There was a livable space. Here, I left a lot of the room open. Again, I wasn't sure of, just like how are you going to operate your layout? How are you going to operate the actual building? How are you going to utilize the space? So I left everything open. I'm starting to utilize it now a little bit, and I'm going to come back and finish it to where I want it to be. In terms of, okay, I'm going to put a spray booth here, sandblaster booth here, and this way I can have everything all set up the way I want it to. Sometimes you just don't know when initially build it, how am I going to set certain things up? What are my power requirements? Where do I need outlets to power my computer that I'm on right now? Are they going to be high? Are they going to be low? Sometimes you don't know. So just be flexible if you can.
Well, now it's time to hear from our audience with the question of the month. This is where you get to hear your voice on Around the Layout podcast by going to aroundthelayout.com/question. Our question of the month was, what changes have you made to your initial track plan during the building process and why? We have 8 great answers to our questions. It's going to take us all the way around the globe. Dave, I know you've done some traveling around the globe, so we're going to do that again tonight with our 8 participants. So let's start with Dean Herman.
Hi, Ray, and Around the Layout podcast listeners. My name is Dean Herman, and I'm the owner and operator of Milwaukee Road International Subdivision Layout in Brisbane, Australia. What changes have I made to my initial track plan during the building process and why? I've made lots and lots of changes, all incrementally aimed at improving the flow of my layout and how it looks and feels. My layout is double-decked and has some quite interesting carpentry and very odd, unique shaped spaces. So a lot of things became apparent to me as I was laying track or creating the spaces. Some things were quite surprising. My terminal yard on a top deck ended up having 4 yard tracks plus a loop and a main line. It was much bigger than I thought I could reasonably fit. Some other changes were using number 8 turnouts instead of number 6s on main lines because they looked and felt better. All the changes really made the layout look and feel more like a railway, more flow, more interest. Some of my scenery sections, I managed to create better curves, so it looked like it was transiting through hilly sections. So it was really about making that feel of it looking like a real layout and things that I could only understand once the space was created. I feel like it's added a lot to what the railway does and how it's coming together, and I thought it was essential having that ability to change. Hope that helps.
Well, thank you, Dean, and very much on target with what we're talking about. And it doesn't seem like there's really a point where you can't change a layout, is there, Dave?
No, he was able to, he saw an opportunity to make some changes for the better and he did it. Right on. That's what you need to do. If it looks right, it probably is right.
Now let's head to Gideon.
Hi, I'm Gideon from St. Louis, Missouri. Model of freelance and N scale called the St. Louis, Leadville, and Rosetta Railroad. My track plan started out as a spaghetti bowl mess of overcomplicated track and has just gotten simpler every single time I've gone and taken it back to the drawing board. What began as an operational nightmare with more track than I could probably ever afford It's turned into a very simple model of one depot and an interchange with the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Fredericktown, Missouri. It's a pretty simple track based off of some Sanborn maps and allows for a deeper focus on realistic operations, possibly operations with more of a historical bent to them since it's based off of a real place, and just a higher quality of scenery and model building as opposed to just trying to jam everything in. Thanks for hosting the podcast, Ray. Looking forward to the next episode.
Well, thank you, Gideon, and my pleasure. And Davis sounds like he learned that less is more.
The KISS principle in operation right there. Keep it simple. Simplicity and prototype at the same time. Way to go.
All right, time to head up to the Great White North.
This is Josh Bowman from Port Hope, Ontario, answering May's question of the month. I have made 2 changes to my track plan as I've been building my layout. First is a freight classification yard, and I wasn't happy how it was coming together, so I went a different direction and made it into a trailer and flat car loading facility with a ramp and a parking area for trailers. I'm quite happy with how this is coming together. The second major change I've made is the addition of a 9-track staging yard. As I'm getting set up for operations, I found I was lacking in a staging area, so we're able to sneak in a hidden 9-track staging area to help have more trains ready to go and keep the operation sessions flowing better. So enjoying the podcast. Thanks, Ray.
Well, you're quite welcome, Josh, and thank you for your answer. And it sounds like Josh figured out what you learned and applied first of all, which was that staging area and how critical it is to operating the layout.
Yeah, I think he saw an opportunity to add some staging, and he modified a track plan. I thought that was great. Well, why not? Because sometimes you don't see things, right? The solution isn't very obvious, but when it becomes obvious, do it. And he didn't hesitate to do it. So good on him.
And now let's head to Ian Farrell, somebody we saw at New England RPM.
Hi, everyone. Ian Farrell from Mastic, New York, and Mastic Shortline on YouTube. What changes have I made and why? And only 90 seconds to answer. Well, my track plan changed from rectangular to L-shaped following the acquisition of additional curved track. Since then, I've added a couple of other sidings. But the thing is, to realize when an afterthought becoming what was I thinking? Love the show, Ray. Keep up the excellent work.
Well, I think, and thank you, Ian, for that response. I think that you have to allow a little bit of that, right? To change your mind a little bit about things, or perhaps you learn something new and have that flexibility and ability to apply that to your layout.
And it seems to be a common trend. People are learning from what they see, maybe looking for a more elegant solution to a problem that's right in front of them. Sometimes you don't see it. It takes a little bit of time to see the solution. And he was able to make those modifications and come up with a better plan overall.
Dave, I know in your life you spent some time in the UK. You ready to head back?
Yeah, let's go.
My name is John Mulholland, and I'm from the New Forest, which is in the south of England in the UK. I made the usual mistake of putting in too much track work. Every space I needed a piece of track, it seemed. And I soon realised that a lot of my rolling stock, my auto racks, etc., just wouldn't go round the many S-curves I found myself having. So I've pretty much redesigned my whole layout with the less is more concept. And it's made a great improvement and it's more enjoyable to operate. Thanks very much. Enjoy the podcast and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, John. And John hits on a point again, the less is more, as he says in the answer, but not having the fear of ripping it out. And sometimes I think within that analysis paralysis, or we get either sentimental or we get this mental block about if you're not happy, tear it out, just becomes this foreign idea. But it's really what you got to do to try to find that happiness within your layout, isn't it?
Yeah, you see those key words. They said it made it more enjoyable in the end.
Yeah.
So that means it's right. If it's more enjoyable, it's right, regardless of the size.
And now let's head to Mike O'Neill.
Hi, Ray. Mike O'Neill from Auckland, New Zealand. A recent change I've made to my HO scale shelf layout is a small extension along one wall, which is going to help add a lot of extra variety to my operations. My Minnesota commercial layout was solely based on 2 mills of the Hiawatha district. However, with slight adjustment to the north end of the layouts and the extension across one wall, I've now been able to add 4 additional industries and 10 car spots, which is going to give it a lot of extra variety of car types and really change the operation and expand it to allow up to 4 operators at a time, with sessions likely to last around 2.5 hours. I've also got a 2-year-old son who's shown a keen interest in the layout, and I'm mindful that I want the layout to be interesting and fun for him. So this extra variety will go a long way to ensuring the layout lasts a long time to come. Cheers, Ray.
Well, thank you, Mike. And, well, we did talk about less is more, but sometimes more is more too, isn't it?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to expand. I always told that to Butch. Butch Eilers has a little a layout he's building up in one of his bedrooms. And I said, you need to go through that closet, put an extension through there. So I don't know if the wife will be too happy. Just don't worry about it. Just blow a hole in that. It's only a small hole. We can fix it.
Yeah, small hole, big fight, but that's all right. Just your layout will be better. Yeah.
But a little bit of that little extension can sometimes really help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then a familiar voice to Around the Layout podcast joins us for our next answer.
Paul Cassar from Sydney, Australia. What did I change from my original track design? Was basically I added an additional interchange, because what I realized was having an interchange allowed more complex switching operations. It allows cars to leave the layout and cars to come on the layout. So I found by adding the interchange gave me more opportunities to operate on the layout. And the other thing is I did a lot of operating while the layout was only in paper plan. I looked at how I would switch cars, and I think I extended the length of one of the runaround roads so that I could have additional cars and runaround. So it's really important to do as much testing before you even build the benchwork, so that when you do lay your track and are in full construction, you're not having to redo your work. Love the show, Ray. Keep up the great work, and catch you soon.
Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate your answer to the question of the month. And knowing what your layout is going to do is really kind of half the battle, isn't it, Dave?
I think the interchange, think about it. Rather than build industries, you can have an interchange any car you would like. Right? Think about that. Tony Custer gave a presentation on his nickel plate road, and he put a picture up of a simple interchange in the middle of a field in Indiana. And he talked about how many hundreds of cars were interchanged in this one little empty field. Pretty amazing, the amount of added operations you can add just with a simple interchange.
Absolutely. Big part of the railroad, especially here in North America, is the passing back and forth of cars that goes on. And there, like you said, that's an industry within itself.
Right.
And now we come full circle and back to Connecticut with Orlando Rosell.
Hey, Ray. My name is Orlando Rosell, and my layout changes went from a rail fanning type of layout to an operation switching layout. All thanks to the Proto Throttle and the Lance Midnight books. Thanks, Ray. Keep up the good work with the podcast.
Well, you're quite welcome, Orlando, and thank you for your answer to the question of the month. And 2 very influential things mentioned there. We mentioned Lance Minheim, and of course, that highly addictive Proto Throttle will get you into operations very quick.
It will. Some great influences between Lance and also that Proto Throttle. Great products.
Well, thank you to everybody who answered the question of the month. And again, we'll have a new question of the month for next month's topic. You can go to aroundthelayout.com/question. Scroll down. You'll see all the instructions to submit your answer to the question of the month. By doing so, you may just hear your voice on Around the Layout podcast. Well, Dave, we're going to have to check back in again with you and get you back on the podcast once those trains are running, because I think this project is just where the story begins, and there's going to be a lot more to be talked about on the Lakeside Sub. Look forward to following all of that, and we'll share all of the images of the build so far, and including the track plan on our website, aroundthelayout.com/241. Thank you so much for coming by and telling us all about the Lakeside Sub in Texas.
Ray, thanks for having me on. It was great seeing you again, and look forward to seeing you in St. Louis.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.